It was just after sunrise on April 16, 1947, when smoke was spotted rising from the SS Grandcamp. The ship had been loading cargo over several days, carrying seemingly harmless goods like peanuts, twine, and tobacco, but hidden deep in its hold was something far more dangerous: a full 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer. And at roughly 8 a.m., dock workers noticed the first signs of the smoke. But since there were no visible flames, they attempted to handle it themselves instead of immediately calling the fire department. They sealed up the hatches and pumped steam into the hold, thinking they could suffocate the fire without using water. This was standard procedure for regular fires caused by wood or oil, but this was no ordinary flame. What they failed to understand was that ammonium nitrate doesn't require external oxygen to ignite. Heat alone causes it to break down explosively, and by trapping that heat, they essentially turned the hold into a pressure cooker. Then, about an hour later, the Grandcamp exploded. The explosion instantly obliterated the dock with unimaginable force, leveling the port and devastating much of Texas City. The blast was so massive, it was picked up by seismographs, and one of the anchors was thrown almost 2 miles away. It also created a massive mushroom cloud, so similar to a nuclear blast that some civilians initially believed that it might be an attack. This is the story of the Texas City explosion in 1947. When the Grandcamp exploded, the force of the blast was equivalent to about 2,000 tons of TNT, comparable to a small nuclear detonation but without the radiation. The explosion was so massive that people as far as 10 miles away heard it, and the ship itself had completely disintegrated. The blast left a crater where the dock used to be. Nearby warehouses, grain elevators, chemical tanks, and fuel refineries were either leveled or engulfed in flames, with almost nothing left standing. Hundreds of people died instantly. Most of them were dock workers, crew members, volunteer firefighters, or civilians who had come to watch the initial smoke. Some of the bodies were never identified. Some were never found. The local fire department had already been on site when the explosion happened, as they were responding to the fire on board the Grandcamp, and when it exploded, nearly every first responder in that crew was killed. That left the city with no organized fire response, in the middle of a growing industrial inferno. And the situation worsened, because apparently, the danger wasn't over yet. Another ship named the High Flyer had already been loaded with over 1,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, along with 2,000 tons of sulfur and other flammable materials. It was docked less than 600 feet away from where the Grandcamp had been. The High Flyer had been severely damaged in the initial explosion, and it was still burning. City officials tried to move the ship, but it was jammed against another vessel, and tugboats couldn't free it at all. Volunteer firefighters, including oil refinery workers and desperate civilians, tried to fight the flames as fast as possible. But there was too much damage, too much heat, too little proper equipment, and far too little time. For over 12 hours, the High Flyer burned, until just past 1 a.m. on the next day, it exploded. The second blast killed several more people and destroyed whatever was left of the firefighting effort. Buildings that had barely held together after the first blast now collapsed. Fires reignited across the city, and several refineries, which had barely been contained, went up in flames again. While the second explosion didn't kill as many people, it ultimately sealed the city's fate, and by the end of that night, almost nothing at the port was left standing. By sunrise, Texas City had become unrecognizable. Entire blocks lay buried under rubble, while fires continued to rage through chemical plants and oil storage tanks. The air was choked with smoke and dust, so thick that people were coughing up blood. Infrastructure had been obliterated, as roads were torn apart, power lines down, and water mains severed. Most of downtown had either collapsed into ruins or been hastily evacuated. The initial blast was particularly devastating to first responders as it killed nearly all of the city's firefighters and several police officers, leaving only a handful alive. Although the mayor survived, his office was destroyed, and since communication lines were down, the National Guard couldn't arrive until the afternoon, which critically delayed organized rescue efforts. This critical delay left the early rescue efforts in the hands of volunteers, like refinery workers, nearby residents, and off-duty military personnel, who immediately began pulling survivors from the wreckage. And just across the bay, Galveston's hospitals were overwhelmed almost immediately, filling to capacity within hours as victims flooded in. Officials had to implement a necessary but harrowing identification process, where unrecognizable victims were tagged with numbers and photographed in hopes that they could later be identified. Makeshift morgues were set up in garages and cold storage units, while investigators desperately relied on personal items like watches, keys, or dental records, anything to identify the dead. The death toll climbed at a horrifying pace. Within the first 24 hours alone, estimates suggested around 400 casualties, though the true number was unclear since many bodies were too badly damaged to identify. This number would keep growing as victims succumbed to burns and injuries in the following days. The official final count would stand at 581, though historians estimate the true number was likely higher due to unrecorded deaths, including migrant workers and visitors. And perhaps the most haunting fact was the collective ignorance surrounding the danger. Many residents didn't even know what ammonium nitrate was, let alone why it had been stored in massive quantities on cargo ships docked beside oil refineries. The fire had burned for a little over an hour before the cataclysmic explosion, yet instead of evacuating, crowds gathered to watch. Children skipped school to see the flames, and bystanders stood dangerously close, completely unaware they were mere hundreds of feet from a ticking time bomb. With no warning issued and no evacuation ordered, the city paid a devastating price for these failures. In the weeks after the explosion, Texas City tried to rebuild, but the nation was already confronting bigger questions as it wasn't just a local tragedy. The staggering scale of destruction had exposed dangerous regulatory gaps, mainly in federal regulation, maritime safety protocols, and industrial oversight. And so, authorities began multiple investigations. When the Coast Guard's report came out later that year, it confirmed the obvious, that the ammonium nitrate aboard the Grandcamp had caused the catastrophe. But more importantly, it revealed how profoundly everyone had underestimated the danger, from dock workers to federal inspectors themselves. Though ammonium nitrate was mainly used as fertilizer, its explosive potential was recognized in mining and demolition work, yet it was still classified primarily as a fertilizer, and was not subject to the same storage or shipping regulations as high explosives like dynamite. This critical oversight meant cargo ships could transport it in massive quantities without proper ventilation, even storing it right beside flammable substances like oil and sulfur, with virtually no safety precautions required. But for survivors and victims' families, all the technical conclusions from those multiple investigations failed to answer their burning questions or ease their pain. Their grief demanded more than reports and findings. And so, by 1948, they made history by suing the federal government under the Tort Claims Act, launching one of the first major attempts to hold officials accountable for such a disaster. The court agreed initially, ruling the government negligent for failing to warn the public, allowing reckless cargo handling, and providing inadequate training. But this victory was short-lived. When the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned the decision, it invoked the discretionary function loophole, shielding policy decisions from legal consequences, even the disastrous ones. And after years of legal battles, Congress passed a bill in 1956 authorizing compensation payments to victims' families, but these were modest and came with no admission of guilt from the government. But still, The tragedy forced several regulatory changes when federal shipping laws were completely rewritten to reclassify ammonium nitrate as the hazardous material it truly is, mandating strict new storage and transport rules. The Coast Guard also implemented rigorous cargo inspections. Ports adopted emergency protocols, and for the first time, America seriously debated the risks of industrial zones bordering communities. While nothing could undo the devastation or bring back the lost, these hard-won reforms established vital safeguards, turning tragedy into lessons that would protect future generations from a similar catastrophe. For people who lived through it, the disaster became a permanent dividing line between life before the explosion and life after. The loss was personal and widespread. Some families lost multiple generations in a single morning. Schools held moments of silence every April. Funeral homes ran out of space, and in some neighborhoods, almost every house had a boarded-up window or a black ribbon on the door. The city didn't forget it either. A memorial was built at the site of the explosion, near where the Grandcamp had been docked. Another one stands in front of the local high school, listing the names of the volunteer firefighters who died. And over time, the memorials became places for school field trips, anniversary events, and quiet visits from relatives who still remember exactly where they were when the windows shattered. But beyond Texas City, the disaster faded faster from public memory than you'd expect for something so large. There are a few reasons for that, and one of them is timing. It happened just 2 years after World War II ended, and it happened just one day after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball, a historic moment that dominated headlines and national attention at the time. In other words, national headlines moved on very quickly. The US had also just seen the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, so the idea of a single ship exploding, even if it leveled a city, didn't have the same impact. Another reason is the lack of a clear narrative, as there was no villain, no foreign enemy, no terrorism, just 2 cargo ships that exploded, followed by a series of oversights. That made it harder to frame as a story and easier to file away in history. Even so, it shaped how modern industrial cities think about zoning, disaster preparation, and risk communication. In the decades since, cities with major chemical plants such as Baton Rouge, Houston, and Wilmington have been required to establish clear buffer zones between industrial and residential areas. Emergency management agencies also develop systems to notify civilians of chemical hazards in real time. Fire departments began specialized training for chemical fires and mass casualty triage, and the Environmental Protection Agency, formed in 1970, used case studies like Texas City to build frameworks for incident response and containment. But the changes weren't universal. Even now, ammonium nitrate is still used worldwide, mostly as fertilizer, but also as a component in explosives. It's still inexpensive, still easy to store and transport in most countries, and in some places, it's still stored in ways that pose the same risks Texas City faced in 1947. That's why the disaster doesn't just belong to the past, it's just another reference point, one that gets revisited every time another explosion happens, like in Toulouse in 2001 or in Beirut in 2020. The details may change, but the lessons remain the same. May the souls of all the victims rest in peace.